This will be a brief video about Saint Peter and a near-death experience I had when I was a girl that had involved Saint Peter. I was probably 15 or 16 years old, so you're talking 40 years ago. I had to have surgery, and while I was going through all that, I had a near-death experience, which in many ways is very typical of the ones we've all read about and heard about, of going through the tunnel and all that. When I got through the other end of the tunnel, I was standing and with a man, and I knew that he was Saint Peter. We talked for a while, and there were other people kind of moving around the sidelines who I recognized as people in my family and neighbors and teachers and whatnot who had passed on. There's a lot more of this experience, of course, than what I'm going to get into here, but suffice it to say, we talked for a while, and then at one point Peter said, "It's not your time. You have to go back." There was no pearly gates or any visible doorway or anything like that I could see, but I felt or sense or knew somehow that I was at a threshold, and that if I went any further I'd never be able to return. So he said I had to go back, and the next thing I know, I'm back. I'm waking up in the recovery room of the hospital, vividly remembering this experience, and still vividly remember it. Here we are, about 40 years later. I remember this as well as anything that happened yesterday. However, at the time, I hadn't been, even though I was raised Catholic, I hadn't been in a Catholic church in quite a while. I was exploring what would then, back then, used to be called the occult. There were no communities of eclectic Wiccans and pagans around back then that you could go to for help or information. There weren't any New Age bookstores. None of that existed back then. There'd be, in the more contemporary bookstores, maybe a small section of what they called occult books. And that was it. So at the time, I did not consider myself a Catholic, hadn't been to church in a while, and I was puzzled as to why I would dream that, because that's what I wanted to view it as, a dream or something. I didn't want to see it or believe it as an experience that actually happened. Over the years, as Spirit often does with us, with things they want us to look at, experiences would come up, and people would pop into my path who would bring this experience to the surface for me again, or direct me to something having to do with Saint Peter. And it kept happening all my life for years, and I was like, what is it with this? I'm not Catholic anymore. I don't want to be Catholic. I reject this. I don't want anything to do with all this Saint Peter stuff. And I was very rejecting of it. And this went on for years. When I finally, a few years ago, returned to some Catholic practices like the Rosary and candle work, novenas, which I'll go into that in another video. I started that because of wanting to do healing work with ancestors on my mother's side. A lot of them, or all of them actually, were Catholic, and a lot of them died with regret. It didn't live really the best way they could have when they were alive. So I wanted to offer them prayers and healing in a way that they would appreciate and understand, in a way that they would do for each other if they were alive. So that meant Catholic practices, and that's what brought me back. It was one of the things to some of these practices, that I was doing it for them. It wasn't a big leap from there to start wanting to work with the saints, to want to try that. And the logical first saint to try working with was Saint Peter, because of my prior experiences with him. So that's what brought me to working with him. The day of the week that you would serve him traditionally is Tuesdays, and most people will tell you his candle colors are red and white. So I don't know if you can move the camera. You can see I've got red candle there. I've got a little red offering bowl. You can see some stones there in front of his statue. Those are from the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And you can see a set of keys there. The keys are one of his tools. But his name actually means rock. So I naturally connect him to any rocks or stones that come into my possession that I want to work with, either for healing or visionary stuff, or to give to other people as gifts. I'll always put them on the altar in Saint Peter's area and let them stay there for a while before I use them or give them to anybody. But he's known for opening and closing the roads. That's why he has the keys. You can petition him to open the roads to things that you want to bring into your life, and close the roads against people who may mean you harm. For starters, with any saint, I wouldn't start with a statue. For whatever reason, just because you want to work with a saint doesn't mean they want to work with you. So before I would make a big investment of money and statues and whatnot, I would start with a little prayer card or an image that I got off the internet and framed, and try to build a relationship with the saint. And if you're successful, then I would move on to a statue or something like that. Anyway, this is my St. Peter story and my near-death experience story, which 40 years after that experience, I really am just starting to understand it now, which goes to show you, it's another reason I wanted to tell this story, because Spirit, thank God, a lot of times we're dunces. They're trying to tell us something, show the way, show something that would be empowering for us or worthwhile. It doesn't fit in what we have in our mind that we want to be doing, so we disregard it. And thank goodness Spirit will be a lot more patient than we are, and they'll just keep putting that in our path again and again and again until we get it. So, and then it's only in retrospect that you look back and you understand all that. So I'm glad Spirit was persistent with me with regard to this. So if you decide to work with St. Peter, I wish you luck with that. If you have any questions, you can ask me.